Strap the old man in." Ryan said it, shaking rainwater off his Italian suit, not even glancing at the wheelchair behind him. James didn't move, didn't speak. He just kept his hand resting flat on the woolen blanket across his lap. Two orderlies stepped forward and clamped their hands on the armrests, certain a paralyzed old man couldn't fight back. From the bassinet near the fireplace, the abandoned infant wailed, and Ryan barely glanced at her, already counting an empire that wasn't his yet. James's fingers traced something heavy and wax-sealed beneath the blanket. Slow, deliberate, a ledger Ryan had never once seen. The orderlies reached for the straps. James's eyes never left his nephew's face, calm in a way that made one orderly hesitate.
Wrong move. He just handed over the keys to his own destruction. Let's get into it.
The rain had been falling for 3 hours. It came in sheets sideways, the kind that found every gap in every doorframe and left dark stains on the imported marble of the Anderson Estate's grand foyer. James Anderson sat in the monitoring room just off the east corridor, his titanium wheelchair angled toward the bank of security screens, his worn woolen lap blanket tucked tight against the cold that crept under the door. He had not slept. The screens showed 12 feeds: the gate, the driveway, the east garden waterlogged and dark, the gardener's shed, the stone fountain, its basin overflowing. At 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared on feed 4. James leaned forward. The car was Ryan's. A low-slung silver silhouette, its million-dollar taillights, 2 red slashes cutting through the downpour. It didn't stop at the intercom. Ryan had the gate code. The iron bars parted and the car rolled through, stopped 40 feet short of the fountain and idled. The driver's door opened. Ryan Mitchell stepped out in a custom Italian suit, the fabric a pale dove gray that the rain began destroying immediately. He didn't flinch. He moved to the rear of the car, opened the trunk, and lifted something out with both hands. A basket. Woven, wicker, cheap, rain-soaked, the kind sold at street markets for a few dollars. He carried it to the gate's inner pillar, set it down on the wet stone, and straightened. He looked at nothing. He said nothing. He walked back to the car, got in, and drove away. The taillights faded into the dark. The gate stayed open. James pressed the intercom button. Once, twice. "Brian." Static, then, "Sir." "East gate, inner pillar. Go now." Silence filled the monitoring room. The screens showed the empty driveway, the open gate, the rain. James counted the seconds by the drip coming from somewhere in the corridor behind him. 53 seconds. Brian Sanders appeared on feed 4. He was built like a man who'd worked outdoors his whole life, broad across the shoulders, slow and steady in his gait. He had his rain jacket on, unzipped, already soaked through. He reached the pillar, crouched down, and was still for a long moment. Then he stood. He had the basket cradled against his chest. James watched the feed. Brian looked into the basket. Brian looked up at the camera, directly at it, as though he could see through the lens to the man watching from the monitoring room 40 meters away. He started walking fast. The foyer door opened 2 minutes later. The sound came first. Small, frantic, the cry of something new and cold and furious at the world. Brian stepped inside, rain streaming off his jacket onto the marble, and crossed directly to where James sat near the fireplace. James looked down into the basket. The infant was wrapped in a thin cotton blanket, white once, now gray and damp. Her fists were clenched. Her face was red with effort, mouth open, the sound coming out of her relentless and ragged and entirely without pause. The cotton was soaked through. The cold had reached her. Brian said nothing. He stood there holding the basket with both hands, water dripping from his elbows. James reached down. He pulled the dry edge of his woolen blanket free and laid it over the infant without lifting her. The crying didn't stop, but it shifted slightly into something less raw. "How long was she out there?" James said. "Can't say for certain." Brian's voice was flat. "Gate log shows the car at 11:47. I got there at 12:04. 17 minutes. James kept his eyes on the infant. She was small, newer than anything in this house. Her fists unclenched slowly as the wool settled around her. "There was something on the ground," Brian said. "By the pillar. Fell from the basket, I think, or from someone's pocket." He set the basket down on the low table by the fireplace. He reached into his jacket and produced a small object sealed inside a clear plastic bag. A pacifier clip. Pale blue, the kind with a personalized nameplate, the kind that cost $40 at a baby boutique. The nameplate caught the firelight. It read RM. James looked at it for a long time. Brian said nothing. He waited the way a man waits when he already understands the situation and is simply letting the other man catch up. James nodded once. Brian slid the bag into his chest pocket and zipped it closed. The fire shifted. A log settled, sending a brief shower of sparks up the flue. Outside, the rain came harder, drumming against the leaded windows, pressing against the glass. The infant made a sound that wasn't quite crying anymore. Something softer, a complaint rather than a plea. James set his hand lightly on the edge of the basket. His index finger traced the rough weave of the wicker slowly back and forth. Under his lap blanket, his other hand rested on something heavy and flat. A ledger, thick leather binding wax seal unbroken. He hadn't moved it in 4 months. He didn't move it now. He just kept his finger on the basket's edge and watched the infant breathe and listen to the rain. The gate, Brian told him, was still open. James said, "Close it." Brian left without a word. The foyer was quiet except for the fire and the rain and the small, persistent breath of the girl in the basket. James did not call anyone else. He did not reach for his phone. He sat in the firelight with his blanket and his ledger and the sleeping infant, and the night moved around him, and he let it. Somewhere in the city, a silver car was pulling into a covered garage, its driver shaking rain from a pale gray suit, entirely unconcerned with what he had left at the gate. But the morning was coming, and James Anderson, motionless in his titanium chair, was already ready for it. He arrived at 9. James heard the car before the monitor showed it. The engine note was distinct, the particular growl of something over-engineered and unnecessary, and it sat in the driveway for a full 30 seconds before the door opened. Ryan Mitchell did not hurry. He never hurried. Hurrying implied something was beyond your control. He came through the front doors without knocking. His suit was immaculate. Dove gray yesterday, charcoal today, the fabric catching the pale morning light with the quiet confidence of something that had never been rained on. His shoes left no water on the marble. His collar was crisp. He smelled of something sharp and sterile cedar and alcohol and money layered thick enough to chase out whatever room he entered. The foyer still carried the smell of last night. Rain, damp wool, wood smoke. Ryan stopped in the center of the room. The infant was in the basket near the fireplace, awake now, making small sounds, not crying, but on the edge of it. Brian stood near the east corridor door, his hands at his sides. James sat where he had been sitting for most of the night, his woolen blanket across his lap, his titanium chair angled toward the fire. Ryan looked at the basket. His expression arranged itself into something that resembled surprise. "What," he said, "is that?" Brian said nothing. James said nothing. Ryan crossed the room slowly, his hands in his pockets, and looked down into the basket with the detached curiosity of a man examining something left on a doorstep, which James noted was precisely what it was. A baby. Ryan straightened. He turned to Brian. "Where did this come from?" It was not a question. The tone made that clear. It was an accusation shaped like a question, the kind designed to establish that someone in the room had made an error, and Ryan was simply waiting to learn which one. Brian met his eyes. "Found at the gate, sir, just after midnight." "At the gate." Ryan repeated the words slowly as though they were foreign. "Someone left an infant at our gate, in the rain." He let the silence sit. Then, "And your response was to bring it inside." "It was cold, sir." Ryan looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at James. James was watching the fire. "Uncle," Ryan's voice shifted. Warmer now practiced the adjustment so smooth it would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't watched him do it 100 times. "I understand you had a difficult night. Brian should have called the authorities immediately." He moved closer, stopping just inside the radius of the firelight. "This isn't a shelter. You can't even..." He paused, let his eyes travel to the wheelchair, to the blanket, to the useless legs beneath it. "You can barely manage your own care," he said. Gentle, regretful, the voice of a man saying a hard thing out of love. "How are you going to manage a child?" The fire popped. The infant made a sound. James did not look up. Ryan turned back to Brian. The warmth left his voice the way a light leaves a room. "You brought a stranger's infant into a private residence without contacting emergency services, without documenting anything without authorization. You've contaminated a potential crime scene." He tilted his head. "I'm going to need your badge by end of day." Brian's jaw tightened. His right hand moved slightly, the fingers curling, then flat again. He did not speak. "Brian?" James's voice came from the chair, quiet and even. "Coffee, please." Brian looked at him. Something passed between them, brief and certain, and then Brian nodded and left the room. Ryan watched him go. Then he turned back to James with an expression of patient suffering. "You're protecting him. That's very like you, Uncle. Very kind." He moved to the armchair across from the wheelchair and sat down without being invited, crossing one leg over the other entirely at home. "But kindness isn't a management strategy. It's why this house has been hemorrhaging money for 2 years. James's index finger moved. Slowly beneath the blanket, it found the edge of the ledger and began to trace the leather binding back and forth the way it had traced the wicker basket last night. "The accounts are performing within projection," James said. Ryan smiled, patient, tired, the smile of a man correcting a child who has said something sweet and incorrect. "The accounts you can see are performing. The ones your lawyers haven't briefed you on in 8 months are a different picture." He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Uncle, I've been carrying this estate on my back while you," a glance at the chair deliberate, "while you've been managing your condition. I don't resent it, but you need to let people who can actually move through the world make decisions for the people who can't." The infant was crying now, thin, reedy, urgent. Ryan looked at the basket with mild displeasure. "The foster system will send someone this afternoon. Standard procedure for abandoned infants." He stood smoothing his jacket front with both hands. "I'll make the call myself. Save Brian the trouble, since apparently he needs things done for him." He produced his phone and began to walk toward the window. James watched the fire. His finger stopped moving beneath the blanket. It rested flat against the wax seal of the ledger. Pressing lightly, feeling the raised impression of the crest pressed into the wax 4 months ago in an attorney's office downtown, the morning after James had signed the blind trust over to Emily Carter. The seal was still unbroken. Ryan's voice came from across the room, easy, unhurried, already dialing. He believed the silence was surrender. He had always believed that about James. The infant cried. James kept his eyes on the fire and his hand on the ledger and his face entirely still. He let Ryan believe whatever Ryan needed to believe, for now. The documents arrived at 10:30, not delivered, produced. Ryan pulled them from a slim leather portfolio he had left by the front door when he came in, as though he had always intended to retrieve them at exactly this moment, as though the morning had been scripted and he was simply following it. He dropped the stack onto the side table next to James's chair. The paper was heavy, cream white, watermarked. Official seals on every page, notary stamps, signatures in blue ink. The kind of documents that cost money to produce and more money to contest. Ryan smoothed the top page with 2 fingers and stepped back, giving James room to look. James looked. "Emergency medical power of attorney," Ryan said. "Signed, witnessed, filed with the county clerk's office as of 8 this morning." He let that land. 2 licensed physicians have attested to cognitive decline, progressive, documented over 18 months. He paused. "I know this is hard to hear." The foyer was quiet. Brian had not come back with the coffee. James turned the top page over. The second page beneath it was a psychiatric evaluation. The third was a financial custodianship order. The fourth was a transfer of estate management authority, temporary pending full probate review effective immediately upon service of the documents. He had just been served. Ryan watched him read. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, his weight evenly distributed, the posture of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the other party to finish processing it. His suit caught the light. His shoes were silent on the marble. "The accounts are already frozen," Ryan said. "Primary operating accounts, household accounts, the discretionary fund your lawyers access. All frozen as of 9 a.m., pending custodianship review." He tilted his head. "Standard procedure, nothing punitive." James set the documents back on the table. He did not look at Ryan. He looked at the far wall, at the point where the crown molding met the plaster, a corner he had stared at during board meetings for 30 years, when he needed to think and didn't want anyone to see him doing it. "The staff," Ryan continued, "everyone except Brian, pending his termination, is being asked to vacate the property for the duration of the review. A week, maybe 2. It's cleaner that way, less confusion about who has authority." He moved to the center of the room. "I've already spoken to Mrs. Hale and the kitchen staff. They're packing now." James heard it then, upstairs, the particular sound of drawers opening and closing, of footsteps crossing quickly from room to room of a house being emptied. "The master office," Ryan said. "I've secured for continuity." He produced a key from his jacket pocket and held it up briefly, the way a man holds up something he wants seen without appearing to display it, then slid it back. "Your personal rooms remain available to you, obviously." "Obviously." The infant made a sound from the basket, not crying, something quieter, a small questioning noise directed at no one. Ryan glanced at it. "The foster placement call is scheduled for 2 p.m. They'll send a caseworker." He straightened his cuffs. "It's the responsible thing. The child needs consistent care, a stable environment. Things that aren't available here under current circumstances." He was using the word circumstances the way people used it when they meant you. James's hands were in his lap. His left hand rested open on the woolen blanket. His right hand was beneath it, resting on the ledger. He had not moved the ledger since last night. He did not move it now. "I want to ask you something," James said. His voice was the same as it always was. Not quieter, not harder. The same measured, unhurried tone he used in boardrooms and courtrooms and at the head of tables where the numbers on the page represented more zeros than most people encountered in a lifetime. Ryan paused. A flicker of something crossed his face there and gone. "Of course." "The proxy," James said. "The medical power of attorney. Under what specific clause does it authorize the freezing of operating accounts?" Ryan blinked. "Once." "Clause 14, financial custodianship under cognitive incapacity." "And the custodianship order." James kept his eyes on the crown molding. "It names you as sole custodian. Temporary custodian. Yes." "Sole." A beat. "Yes." "No co-trustee requirement. No independent financial review." Ryan's chin lifted slightly. The patience in his expression thinned at the edges, barely visible, a fraction of a degree. "The documents were reviewed by my legal team." "Your legal team," James said. "That's correct." James nodded, once, slowly, as though this were merely interesting. He said nothing else. Ryan waited for the follow-up question, for the challenge for the old man to reach for the phone or call for Brian or push the wheelchair toward the door in some futile gesture of resistance. He waited with the particular stillness of a man braced for impact. The impact did not come. James lowered his eyes from the crown molding to the fireplace. The fire had burned down to coals orange and slow. The infant had gone quiet again. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed and then another, and the sounds of the house being dismantled continued without pause. Ryan unclenched his jaw. He reached for the leather portfolio, tucked it under his arm, and moved toward the master office hallway. "I'll have the medical transport arranged for this afternoon," he said without turning back. 2 o'clock. It's better to move quickly. Give you time to adjust." The hallway door opened. It closed. The metallic snap of the deadbolt engaging came through the wood, clearly precise and final. The foyer held only firelight and the infant's breath and James. His right hand, pressed flat against the wax seal beneath the blanket. Ryan had just answered every question on the record. He had no idea he was on the record.
Absolutely not. He's using forged medical papers to steal a billionaire's empire and throw his own flesh and blood to the state. If that were me, I would have run him over with that wheelchair the second he started gloating. Imagine being trapped in your own home, watching an arrogant brat dismantle your life while a baby cries in the background. The audacity is real.
Brian did not go to the kitchen. He had said coffee. He had left the room carrying that word like a reason, and Ryan had watched him go and filed him underhandled, and that was the last mistake Ryan made before the larger ones. Brian went to the east corridor. He walked at the pace of a man with a single, unremarkable task, past the linen closet, past the service stairs, past the door marked private that had been marked private for 11 years, and that Ryan had never once thought to ask about. He opened it and went inside. The security monitoring room was small. One desk, one chair, 4 screens of patch panel along the left wall that nobody had touched since the estate's digital network upgrade 3 years ago. The upgrade had been Ryan's suggestion, faster, cleaner, fully integrated. He had been very proud of it. He had not asked what it replaced. Against the back wall below the patch panel sat a rotary phone. Black heavy, the handset worn smooth at the earpiece from decades of use. Its cord ran into the wall through a metal grommet and connected to a dedicated analog landline that predated the estate's first renovation, a line that ran directly to a junction box on the street and touched nothing inside the digital network Ryan now believed he controlled. Brian sat down. He did not hesitate. He did not check the door behind him. He lifted the handset, listened for the tone, and dialed 11 digits from memory. It rang twice. Emily Carter. It's Brian. He kept his voice level below the threshold of the corridor outside. Green light. He served the documents this morning. Accounts are frozen. Staff is being cleared. Medical transport scheduled for 2 p.m. A pause, not uncertainty. The pause of someone already in motion, already calculating. The DNA, Brian said. The pacifier clip. James flagged it last night. I have it. Her voice was precise, unhurried, carrying the particular quality of someone who had been awake since before the call came and had been expecting it. The lab ran it on priority this morning. Results in 40 minutes. Brian looked at the screens. Feed 4 showed the front gate closed now. Feed 2 showed Ryan's car in the driveway. Feed 7 showed the upstairs hallway. Mrs. Hale moving past the frame with a bag over her shoulder, not looking at the camera. He's locking down the master office, Brian said. He answered James's questions about the proxy on record. Clause 14, sole custodianship, no co-trustee. A brief silence. Then, he said that out loud. In the foyer, fire was on. Feed 3 has audio. Another pause. Shorter. Brian. Her tone shifted by a fraction the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. Stall the medical transport for exactly 12 minutes. How? Your discretion. A beat. You'll think of something. The line clicked. She was gone. Brian set the handset down. He sat for a moment in the small room with the hum of the monitors and the distant sound of footsteps on the floor above and the faint mechanical breathing of the patch panel. 12 minutes. He stood. He went back to the kitchen, moving at the same unremarkable pace, and he made the coffee. He made it slowly and correctly the way James preferred it, dark and without anything added in the heavy ceramic mug that had sat on the second shelf for 20 years. He carried it back to the foyer on a small tray. Ryan was not there. The hallway door was still closed, the deadbolt still turned. Brian set the coffee on the table next to James's chair and stood back. James looked at the mug, then at Brian. Brian said nothing. He touched the chest pocket of his jacket once where the evidence bag was zipped, and then he put his hand back at his side. James picked up the coffee. Above them, the house continued to empty. Doors. Bags. The particular flattened silence that follows people taking their noise with them. By 11:15, the upstairs was still. By 11:30, Brian heard the kitchen staff's car pull out of the service drive. The estate settled around its last 2 occupants and 1 infant. Ryan emerged from the master office at 11:20. He had the portfolio under one arm and his phone in his hand mid-conversation, his voice carrying through the hallway door before it opened. "Confirmed for 2:00, yes. The transfer paperwork is ready on my end." He came into the foyer, glanced at James without breaking stride, and moved toward the front window. "Tell them to use the east service entrance, less visible from the road." He meant the medical transport. He was routing it through the service entrance. Brian filed that away. Ryan ended the call and pocketed his phone. He looked at the infant in the basket with the same expression he'd worn all morning. Mild, impersonal, the look of a man clearing line items from a list. "Foster caseworker confirms 2:00 as well," he said to no one in particular. "They'll take the child directly from here. No need for a secondary transfer." Brian stood near the corridor door. He was holding the serving tray with both hands. "Sir," he said, "the service entrance camera is showing a fault light. The display board in the monitoring room. Might be a loose connection from the rain last night. I'd want to check it before any vehicles use that approach." Ryan looked at him, briefly assessing. "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe 12. Ryan waved a hand. "Fine, handle it." Brian nodded and left the room. He walked to the monitoring room, closed the door behind him, and sat in the chair in front of the screens. He did not touch the camera display board. He looked at his watch. 11:41. He pulled the evidence bag from his chest pocket and set it on the desk in front of him. The pacifier clip caught the monitor light pale blue, the nameplate reading RM in clean engraved letters. Outside, the rain had stopped. 11:42. Brian sat very still and waited, and the analog phone on the back wall sat with him, and the gate on Feed 4 stayed closed, and somewhere across the city, Emily Carter was already moving. The ambulance arrived at 1:47, 13 minutes early. Brian heard it from the monitoring room. Not the siren, the engine, the particular diesel idle of a heavy vehicle turning off the main road, and then the crunch of the service drive gravel that meant it had taken the east approach without waiting for clearance. He was already moving when Ryan's voice came through the corridor. "Brian, east entrance." Brian came out of the monitoring room. He walked the corridor at the same steady pace he had maintained all morning, and he reached the east entrance door and opened it, and the ambulance was already there, backed in its rear doors, open, 2 orderlies in gray scrubs stepping out onto the gravel with a folded stretcher between them. 13 minutes early. He had planned for 12. Brian held the door and said nothing and let them in. They came through the service entrance into the back corridor, wheeling the stretcher, its rubber wheels loud on the stone floor. The sound carried. It bounced off the corridor walls and reached the foyer before the orderlies did that abrasive, rubbery squeak, rolling ahead of them like an announcement. Ryan met them in the foyer doorway. He had his jacket buttoned, now his phone in his breast pocket, the portfolio tucked under his arm. He looked at the orderlies the way he looked at service staff, past them, through them, at the logistical problem they represented. "He's here," Ryan said, gesturing toward James. "Cooperative, but he may resist verbally. Ignore it. The proxy authorizes physical transport if necessary." The orderlies nodded. They unfolded the stretcher. The legs locked into place with a metallic snap loud in the quiet room, and the sound hit the crystal chandeliers overhead and scattered. James sat by the fireplace. The coals had gone cold. The basket was on the low table beside him, the infant asleep, her fists loose. Her breathing the only soft sound in the room. James had his blanket across his lap and his hands resting on top of it, open still. He watched the orderlies approach. The first one was broad, professional, efficient in his movements. He came around the left side of the wheelchair and gripped the armrest without speaking. The second positioned himself at the rear of the chair. James did not speak. Was it enough? Had he waited too long, held too still, trusted too much to architecture he couldn't see from where he sat? The ledger was under his blanket. The accounts were frozen, the staff was gone. The master office was locked and Ryan had the key, and the proxy was filed with the county clerk, and the transport was 13 minutes early, and Emily was somewhere in the city in traffic that did not care about any of this. Was the plan enough when the body failed? The first orderly began to move the wheelchair. James let him. Not because he had given up, because the chair was not the position. The chair had never been the position. James Anderson had spent 30 years watching men mistake the throne for the power, the title for the leverage, the visible asset for the actual one. Ryan had looked at the wheelchair and seen a cage. He had looked at the blanket and seen surrender. He had looked at the frozen accounts and seen victory. He had not looked at the ledger. He had not asked about it once. The orderly pushed the wheelchair toward the stretcher. 3 feet. 2. Ryan stood to the side, watching his arms crossed, now the portfolio tucked tight. His expression was the practiced neutrality of a man who had told himself a sufficient number of times that this was necessary, responsible, the right thing, until the telling had become indistinguishable from believing. 1 foot. From the basket, the infant stirred. She made a sound small and sudden, not quite a cry, something between a question and a complaint. Her fists tightened. James looked at her. She was looking back. Not at him, not at anything. The unfocused gaze of a creature too new for directed sight, but the direction was his, and the sound had stopped, and in the stopping was something that landed in the room with more weight than the stretcher's metallic snap. He put his hand on the edge of the basket. The orderly paused. Ryan said, "Continue." And then from outside, not from the service drive, from the front, from the main approach, the one that faced the road and the iron gate and the stone pillar where Brian had found a wicker basket in the rain 14 hours ago. A siren, not an ambulance. The pitch was different, sharper, the particular two-tone of a police cruiser, and it was close, and it was getting closer, and it did not slow. The way sirens slow when they are passing, it stopped. At the gate, Ryan heard it, his chin came up. His arms uncrossed. The second siren reached them a breath later, same pitch, same direction, and beneath both of them the sound of tires on the main drive, gravel, multiple vehicles, not the cautious single file of service traffic, but the wide parallel approach of vehicles that had right-of-way and knew it. Ryan turned toward the front window. The orderlies had stopped moving. Brian appeared in the east corridor doorway. He stood there with his hands at his sides and his face giving nothing away, and he looked at James, not at Ryan, not at the orderlies, only at James. James looked back at him. The infant made no sound. The chandelier overhead caught the first flash of light through the front window, red and blue strobing across the crystal, scattering across the marble floor in fractured pieces. Ryan's portfolio slipped. He caught it. His jaw was tight. Outside, a car door opened. Then another. Then the particular sound of heels fast certain crossing the front stone steps without hesitation. The door handle turned. The doors opened wide. Emily Carter came through them like a weather system. She wore a razor-sharp charcoal trench coat tailored close dry, not a thread out of place, and she moved across the marble with the particular velocity of someone who had not stopped moving since before dawn and did not intend to stop now. 2 uniformed officers came in behind her, then a third, their tactical flashlights cutting across the foyer in bright, chaotic arcs before settling. She didn't look at Ryan first. She looked at the orderlies. Step back from the chair. Her voice was even, not loud. The kind of voice that does not need volume because it has never needed it. Both of you, now. The orderlies stepped back. Ryan moved forward. Who authorized? Judge Callahan. Emily reached into her coat and produced a folded document, crisp the seal visible from across the room. Emergency injunction. Filed at 1:14 this afternoon, signed at 1:31, served to the county clerk's office at 1:44. She held it out toward Ryan without stepping closer. The medical transport is suspended pending review of the proxy documentation. The officers are here to ensure compliance. Ryan took the document. He opened it. His eyes moved across the page fast, then slower, then stopped. Emily was already turning. She crossed to James. She crouched down to his level without ceremony, without the performance of concern, simply putting herself at eye height with the man in the chair the way she had done in conference rooms and depositions. In one very long arbitration hearing 8 years ago when they had first established what their working relationship would look like. The ledger, she said quietly. James reached beneath his blanket and produced it. Thick leather wax seal, intact, 4 months, unbroken. He held it out. and she took it with both hands carefully, the way you carry something that has already done its work and simply needs to be present for the confirmation. She stood. Ryan had finished reading the injunction. His face had reorganized itself into something controlled, deliberate, the expression of a man who has encountered an obstacle and is internally rerouting. He looked at Emily with the specific attention of someone who has just realized they are not in the room they thought they were in. Counselor. His voice was measured, professional. This injunction is a procedural delay, nothing more. The proxy is valid, filed, witnessed, and... Emily reached into her coat again. She produced a second document, thinner, a single folded sheet with a laboratory header and a case number along the top margin. She crossed the room in 6 steps and placed it against Ryan's chest, flat-palmed, and held it there until his hand came up to take it. She stepped back. Ryan unfolded it. The room was very quiet. One of the officers had moved to the east corridor doorway. Another stood near the front entrance, his flashlight lowered now, the beam aimed at the floor. Brian had not moved from the corridor. He stood exactly where he had been standing when the doors opened, his hands at his sides, watching. Ryan's eyes reached the bottom of the page. He did not move. Rapid DNA analysis, Emily said. Processed on priority submission this morning. The sample source is a personalized pacifier clip recovered from the inner pillar of the east gate at approximately midnight last night. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The result is a 99.9 paternity match to the male subject whose DNA is on file with the county family court from a prior civil matter. She paused. That subject is you, Mr. Mitchell. Ryan's hand holding the document dropped slightly. The infant in that basket, Emily continued, is your biological daughter, abandoned at a private residence in a rainstorm at 11:47 p.m. last night. The responding security witness logged the time, the vehicle, and the gate code used for entry. She glanced toward Brian. That log has been preserved and transmitted. Brian nodded. Once. Ryan looked up from the document. He looked at Emily. His jaw was set, his eyes moving with the rapid calculation of a man running scenarios, checking exits, finding them closed one by one. This doesn't affect the proxy, he said. Paternity is a separate matter entirely. You're right, Emily said. It is. She opened the ledger. She turned to a marked page, the silk ribbon placeholder falling aside, and held it so Ryan could see the text without approaching. The page was dense with legal language, columns of trust designations, beneficiary structures, clause references. The Anderson Family Blind Trust, Emily said, established 14 years ago and amended 18 months ago, contains a moral turpitude clause. Clause 9, subsection C. Any named beneficiary who engages in conduct constituting felony, child endangerment, fraud, or willful abandonment of a dependent automatically and immediately forfeits all beneficial interest in the trust. She let him read the line himself. The clause is self-executing. It requires no court action. It requires no vote. The moment the DNA result confirmed paternity and the gate log confirmed abandonment, the forfeiture was triggered. Ryan said nothing. Your medical proxy, Emily continued, derives its authority from your status as primary beneficiary. No beneficial interest means no standing. The proxy is void. She closed the ledger. As of 1:31 this afternoon, when Judge Callahan signed the injunction, the estate accounts are unfrozen. The custodianship order is dissolved, and the legal guardian of record for the infant in that basket is James Anderson, pending formal court confirmation next week. The chandelier threw light across the room, steady now, no longer strobing. Ryan stood in the center of the marble floor with the DNA report in one hand and the injunction in the other, and his portfolio under his arm, and his custom silk suit, absolutely perfect, and nothing else. James had not spoken. He was watching Ryan the way he had watched the fire all morning, still, unhurried. His hands rested open in his lap above the place where the ledger had been, and his face held the particular calm of a man who built the room he is sitting in and knows exactly where every wall is. Ryan's mouth opened, closed. The officer near the corridor moved forward. The handcuffs were standard issue, matte steel utilitarian, the kind produced by the tens of thousands and indifferent to the wrists they closed around. The officer produced them without theater, without announcement, and when they clicked shut around Ryan Mitchell's wrists, the sound was small and clean and final, and the custom silk sleeves of his charcoal suit bunched and creased at the cuffs, in a way no amount of dry cleaning would fully correct. Ryan did not struggle. He stood very still, which was the only kind of dignity available to him now, and he stared at a point on the marble floor approximately 2 feet in front of his shoes. The officer read him his rights in a flat, practiced voice. Felony child endangerment. Fraud. Filing of forged medical documentation with a county clerk. The words came out evenly without emphasis, each charge landing in the quiet room with the same weight as the others, and Ryan's expression did not change through any of them. Emily stood to the side, the ledger under her arm, watching without expression. Brian stood in the corridor doorway. His hands were at his sides. He had not moved from that position since the doors opened. He watched Ryan cross the marble toward the front entrance bracketed by the 2 officers, and when Ryan passed the basket by the fireplace, he did not look at it. Brian looked at it. The infant was awake. She had come awake sometime in the last few minutes, pulled out of sleep by the voices and the light and the particular charge in the air of a room where something irrevocable is happening. Her eyes were open and unfocused, aimed at the chandelier above her, and her fists were loose, and she was not crying. She was, for the moment, entirely calm. The front doors opened. Cold air came through. The sound of the police radios outside the idle of engines, the particular quality of outdoor light after rain. Ryan was taken through without ceremony, and the doors closed behind the officers, and the foyer contracted back to its own silence. The 3rd officer remained. He stood near the window, giving the room space, doing his job by doing nothing conspicuous. Emily set the ledger on the side table. She opened it to the back section, the pages James had shown no one, and she produced a pen from her coat pocket and set it beside the ledger without comment. The work that remained was procedural and would take the rest of the afternoon. She knew what it contained. She had drafted most of it. She crossed to James. She stood beside his chair without crouching this time, standing at his shoulder the way colleagues stand, and she looked at the basket. "The formal guardianship hearing is Thursday," she said. "Judge Morales, I've already filed the preliminary paperwork. The DNA result goes into the record as Exhibit 1. She paused. "The foster caseworker who was scheduled for 2 o'clock has been redirected. I spoke to their supervisor this morning." James nodded. "The offshore accounts," Emily continued, her voice dropping slightly, "not for secrecy, but for register the shift from legal proceeding to private matter. Ryan froze the operating accounts, the decoys, the primary trusts were never touched. They were never accessible to him." She glanced at the blanket in his lap, at the place where the ledger had spent the night. "He spent the morning locking a door that didn't lead anywhere." James said nothing for a moment. He was looking at the basket, then the clause. Clause 9, subsection C. Emily's voice was even. "It was written into the trust amendment 18 months ago, 2 months after Ryan was made VP, 1 month after the first set of forged signature complaints came to my desk." She paused. "You were patient." "I was thorough," James said. Emily almost smiled. She picked up the pen and held it out. James took it, uncapped it, and signed the first page of the back section with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, the signature identical to the one on the original trust document 14 years ago, legible and unornamented and entirely itself. Brian moved. He crossed the foyer without being asked, without announcement, and he went to the basket. He lifted it carefully with both hands and carried it to James's chair and set it on the low table directly beside him, close enough to reach without extending fully. He stepped back. James looked at the infant for a long moment. She was still looking at the chandelier. Her mouth made a small, exploratory movement, working through something, testing the architecture of her own face. James reached into the basket. He lifted her with both hands slowly, with the particular care of someone who has not held something this small in a very long time and is not going to rush the remembering of how. He settled her against his chest above the woolen blanket, his left arm supporting her weight and his right hand resting lightly across her back. She did not cry. She turned her face slightly, finding the warmth, and made the sound she had been making all morning, the one that was not quite a question and not quite a complaint. And then she was quiet. The soft, even warmth of her weight settled against James's chest. Her heartbeat was very fast, the way new hearts always are, quick and certain and entirely committed. James sat with her. Emily worked at the side table, moving through the ledger pages with quiet efficiency, tabbing, marking, building the record that would walk into the courtroom Thursday morning and close every remaining door. The officer by the window stood and said nothing. The fire was cold, but the room was not cold, and the chandelier held its light steady, and the crystal did not scatter it anymore. Brian went to the front window. Outside, Ryan Mitchell was in the back of the police cruiser. The door had closed on his silk suit and his portfolio and his morning's work and everything he had believed about how the day would end. The cruiser's engine was running. The second vehicle was already pulling out. It had started raining again. Lightly, without conviction, the remnant of last night's storm working through its final business. The gravel of the main drive was dark with it. The stone pillar by the east gate was dark with it, the inner face of it where a wicker basket had sat for 17 minutes in the cold. Brian watched the cruiser until its taillights reached the main road. Then he turned from the window and looked across the foyer at James. James was looking down at the infant in his arms. His titanium chair caught the chandelier light along its rims, bright and clean. His woolen blanket was across his lap, worn at the edges. The fabric thinned in the places his hands had rested for years. The infant's face was turned toward his chest. Her fist, small and certain, had closed around the edge of the blanket. Brian went to the front gate and he held it open, and the cruiser turned onto the main road and disappeared, and the rain came down and the estate was quiet, and inside the empire was in the right hands.
Made up. But that feeling of watching a helpless victim completely decimate an arrogant bully, using nothing but pure intellect and airtight law. I felt my own blood pressure drop when those cuffs clicked. How would you have handled Ryan if he walked into your house? Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe. Simple.